He stole it! He stole it!
My precious. I'm sure there's only one character you can think of whenever you hear those two words together. That's right, folks. Today, we'll be talking about Gollum. He's one of the most iconic characters from J.R.R. Tolkien's work. Everyone knows who he is, even if they're not a Lord of the Rings fan, simply because of his iconic voice and several memes. But there's so much more to our Gollum than the memes. So today in our video, we'll be taking a deep dive into this complex character who's extremely pivotal to the story and learn how he transformed from Smeagol into the creature we know. From his mental descent to his unique anatomy, none of the stones will be left unturned. So get cozy and let's get to it. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Bagginses. What is a Bagginses?
Who is Gollum? How did the ring twist his physical body? It is true that the version of Gollum we think of is the pale, gaunt man who looks like he should not be strong, but somehow surprisingly is. Faramir describes Gollum as having an ill-favored look with pale gray skin and only 6 teeth. Even the orcs described him as a starved frog. His almost bald head, paired with his fingers, which look more like claws, and his extremely emaciated figure definitely strike terror. But here's the thing, Gollum did not start off this way. In fact, once upon a time, he looked just like any other hobbit. He was a Styr, actually. For those who don't know, a Styr is one of the 3 early hobbit types that were prevalent in the Third Age. Styrs used to live in the Vales of Anduin and were primarily Riverland people. They dwelled in the Gladden Fields and were fishermen by profession. Smeagol was born in the year 2430, and he used to live with his grandmother for most of his life. In the year 2463, his cousin, Deagol, took Smeagol on a fishing trip in the Gladden Fields for Smeagol's birthday. The two cousins were out and about in the water on their boat, casting lines and catching fish, when Deagol caught a particularly large fish. Along with the fish, something shiny came out of the water. This was the gold ring. When Smeagol noticed the gold ring, he immediately fell in love with it. It was very evident that it was the power of the ring that called to him and made him so obsessed. He asked Deagol to give him the ring as his birthday present, but Deagol had no intention of giving it. This pushed Smeagol far enough that he was willing to get physically violent with Deagol. A scuffle over the ring followed, and in his desperation to get his hands on the ring, Smeagol actually choked Deagol. He murdered his cousin in cold blood and took the ring as his own. This corruption in the hand of the One Ring continued, and while Smeagol was happy to own the ring, his life, on the other hand, was falling apart completely. His people banished him. His own grandmother kicked him out of her hole, and with nowhere else to go, Smeagol went to the Misty Mountains in the year 2470. Despite everything in his life falling apart and everyone close to him chasing him away, Smeagol was more than happy to live in a cave in the Misty Mountains because he had his pretty ring with him. Over the years, the evil forces of the ring twisted his mind and body completely. While the ring did extend his life far beyond the natural limits, what remained of Smeagol was nothing like the hobbit who once existed. Smeagol considered the ring as his precious and his birthday present as he lived all those lonely years in the Misty Mountains, with the ring acting as a replacement in his mind for Deagol, whom he killed. While a lot of us find ourselves hating Smeagol, or Gollum as he is now known, it's undeniable that his life is sad. Feels like he already had some deep-seated loneliness and lack of self-worth, which was fed upon by the ring's malignant influences and eventually led him to becoming this twisted mockery of who he used to be. Why does he hate the usual hobbit food? What does he eat? I think Gollum's eating habits give us a lot more to work on beyond just food preferences. If we look at the hobbits, we can see that they are just like us. We all like a happy family, sharing meals and having people to count on. Tolkien presented the hobbits as common men who, with just a small change in loyalty and a small step of bravery, can bring about huge changes in the world. Honor, courage, and loyalty, with just these 3 things, even the smallest members of society, who are not as remotely significant as the rest, could bring about huge changes and tip the scales of the battles between good and evil. In Peter R. Jackson's movies, we genuinely do feel these qualities about the hobbits. They love their family, good food, peace and quiet. That's why when we see Sam cooking on the side of the Weathertop just because he's hungry, we don't think it's out of character or that he's being exceptionally stupid to move the plot forward. He loves food, and since he cannot eat raw food, he decided to cook it properly, even if it gave away the locations of the hobbits to the Nazgul. Now, the polar opposite of that spectrum is Gollum. With his stringy hair, impossible postures, broken teeth, twisted features, and everything else considered, he's quite disgusting to look at. He's everything that the hobbits are not. He's untrustworthy, cold, selfish, and evil. His preferred meal is a raw and wriggling fish. As he told Samwise Gamgee, he devours the fish in an almost animalistic rage. If his looks did not disgust us enough, seeing him chomp on the fish as the blood and guts dribble out from the corners of his mouth definitely did. But here's the thing, despite being so disgusting, the reaction that Tolkien wanted from fans is to feel pity when it comes to Gollum. It's hard to look at him and pity him, but that's how it goes in real life. The ones who deserve our pity the most are so difficult to pity. Gollum was cast away from his grandmother's house, the only place he had ever known. He was banished from his loving home, friends and family, and the peace and quiet that he had once lived in, all because the power of the ring twisted his feelings and took him over. And with nowhere to go, he settled down in a cave in the Misty Mountains. We all know that near the Misty Mountains, you have an orc village. So even if Gollum wanted to use fire in his cave when he first arrived in the Misty Mountains, that would have given away his location, putting his life in danger. His life and his ring. Those were the only two things that were left for him. So he powered through. He ate fish, bats, eggs, birds, and bugs. And if he was very, very sick, he ate roots and plants. So after centuries of having these as part of his eating habits, it makes sense why he doesn't wish to eat cooked food anymore. Tolkien once commented on Gollum's lack of civility. He implied that while Gollum could probably stomach cooked fish and potatoes, it is simply no longer his preference. He would much rather live like an animal that he had become. As he is so far away from the community, anything that reminds him of the community that banished him is an object of hatred in his eyes. Food is considered art and beauty, especially elven food, so that's probably why he would rather reject all of them, even though he's able to stomach them. He can't touch anything made by elves. The Middle-earth that Tolkien depicts in his writing is a place where forces of dark and light collide over and over again. The forces of evil in this world cannot create anything. They can only corrupt everything that has already been made. Now, keeping this in mind, let's look at where the elves stand. The elves are like the demigods of this world. They are all-knowing, extremely powerful, and almost immortal in comparison to a hobbit or a man. The elves, when they make anything, whether it's food or weapons, everything has a little bit of elven magic in it. Magic flows naturally in the elves, so it makes sense that everything they touch has some semblance of that. Gollum, who had been under the effect of the One Ring for an extremely long time, has been twisted, both in his body and mind, by it. The ring has made him sneaky, nasty, and evil, and he knows it. The ring twisted the initial spark of evil in his heart and blew it out of proportion until Smeagol was completely devoured, and only Gollum was left. That's why elven things, with traces of elven magic, affect Gollum so much. The powers of good present in anything that the elves created definitely affected the evil that resided in Gollum. That's why when Gollum was tied with the elven rope, he screamed and complained about the excruciating pain. Whether he exaggerated or not, complaining that this rope would have killed him was what got him released in the end. Another thing that we have to keep in mind is that whenever Gollum sees anything from the elves or the hobbits, that serves as a reminder of civilization, the civilization that he was banished from. All the things made by the elves not only cause him physical pain, they also cause him emotional pain, as they remind him of who he used to be when he used to be less evil, snarky, and lonely. This made him lose his temper, as it would for any of us, and so this is why he cannot touch elven things and avoids them like the plague.
Master's my friend. You don't have any friends.
Does he have dissociative identity disorder? When we meet Gollum with the hobbits in the Misty Mountains, we soon realize that Gollum is not the most mentally sane out of the bunch. We often see him refer to himself using two names, Gollum and Smeagol. We soon realize that the Gollum aspect of him is the bad side of his personality. It's the prevalent personality and is a slave to the ring. He would be willing to kill anyone if they tried to take the ring away from him. On the other hand, we have Smeagol, the kinder version of his personality, who remembers remembered love and friendship. Samwise Gamgee called Smeagol Slinker and Gollum Stinker, and between you and me, I like this naming convention quite a bit. Smeagol, the personality, is extremely eager to please, whereas Gollum is just as selfish. This condition where one person develops two or more distinct personalities is known as dissociative identity disorder, previously known as multiple personality disorder. Each of these personalities in the patient is extremely distinct from each other, and the patient often suffers from memory gaps, which are far more severe than the usual forgetfulness. If Smeagol promised the hobbits to do something, and then Gollum's personality took over, he would forget whatever Smeagol had promised in the first place. This is very common in all real-life patients diagnosed with the disorder. However, do keep in mind that the manifestation of this disorder does vary from person to person. According to DSM-5-TR, a person is at risk of developing this disorder if they go through early childhood trauma during the age of 5 to 6. Severe bullying, neglect, rape, childhood abuse, and violence are commonly reported in 90% of the cases that were diagnosed with this disorder. When it comes to Smeagol, Tolkien explained that perhaps the loneliness and the conflicting emotions he felt about himself and the rings are what led to the formation of the two personalities. Smeagol clearly misses his family, friendship, and love, but Gollum despises it all because they all banished him and left him to rot. Smeagol and Gollum often quarrel because they do not have anyone else to speak with. He has such a lonely life, and even though he's evil, I can't help but feel bad for the guy. I have to give my props to Tolkien because this is such a genuine portrayal of dissociative identity disorder. Does the ring give him immortality? There's no denying that creating a world from scratch is not easy. That's why, as fans of the fantasy genre, we often try not to look at the continuity errors as gaping loopholes. Of course, if we look at a book like Lightlark, which has several of them, it becomes a bit difficult to immerse ourselves in the world that the author has created. Thankfully, when it comes to J.R.R. Tolkien, things are not like that. He created an elaborate universe with a lot of thought and effort put into it. What seems like a glaring continuity error at first glance can actually be explained later when we get deeper into the lore. For example, what seems initially to be an unexplained part of the story is immediately lent an explanation upon considering the case of Gollum. If you've not guessed already, we're talking about Bilbo's slow or arguably stagnant aging process. After the events of The Hobbit, Bilbo had carried the One Ring to the Shire, and for 60 years, it never left Hobbiton. Everyone who knew Bilbo marveled at how little he had aged by the time his 11th birthday came knocking. This was certainly due to how the ring works, and such is what gave Gollum his unnatural longevity as well. The One Ring is known to affect the bearer from the moment they possess it. The first side effect of the One Ring is that the bearer would get a strong attachment to it, which would increase over time, making it more and more difficult for them to give it up. The One Ring increases the lifespan of the bearer like the other great rings of power. But unlike the other rings, the person wearing the One Ring would simply continue at whatever age they put on the ring, instead of actually growing old. Gandalf explained this to us, stating that each minute the bearer wears the ring, they would feel the weariness grow within themselves. On top of that, if the wearer wears the ring frequently, they will become wraith-like creatures over time and eventually be subsumed into the spirit world. The beginnings of this, Bilbo had beautifully explained as being the butter scraped over too much bread. But all of this is dependent on the wearer and what their inner nature tends to be. When it comes to hobbits, the ring cannot easily tempt them, as the hobbits prefer a simpler life. There's not much to tempt them with, as hobbits in general do not seek more. Smeagol got his hands on the ring by killing his cousin, and that act of violence is what resulted in the ring having such an overwhelming effect on his mind. Bilbo, on the other hand, accidentally came across the ring, and he kept it with him for a significantly shorter time, somewhere around 60 years. In comparison to Gollum, who had it for 500 years. Not to mention, Bilbo is far more principled than Gollum, and that's why he is far less prone to falling victim to the effects of the ring. Bilbo used the ring to avoid someone or to play an occasional prank, whereas Gollum used it for years and years. Gollum was obsessed with the ring, and he was willing to go to any length to ensure it stayed in his hands. This dark intent that Gollum had is what pushed him closer and closer to the corruptive effects of the ring, hence making him kind of immortal, but not quite enslaved to Sauron's will. Bilbo is able to give away the ring when he realizes it's time, and that's why, even though he loses his immortality, he saves his soul. What's the reason behind his incredible eyesight? There is no denying that Gollum has incredible eyesight. Even when Bilbo finds it hard to traverse through the dark mountain terrains, Gollum is pointed, simply waiting in the night and watching him move. But how can he see so well in the dark? Well, we can have a few explanations behind it. The first explanation would be that after Gollum was banished to the Misty Mountains, he had to live there in the dark for quite a while. It was not like there was a lot of light coming into the Misty Mountains in the first place. Owing to the 500+ years that he had stayed in the dark, barely lit cave, his eyesight adjusted to the dark and adapted to it. It makes complete sense because that's how our eyes work. When we first step into a dark room, we cannot see anything from the get-go. However, after giving it a few minutes, we start making out shapes, and we can see. Perhaps that is what happened when it comes to Gollum's eyesight. But then again, there's another explanation for this particular ability of his. See, the ring turned him rather animalistic. From eating raw fish to scaling high mountains like it's no big deal, Gollum definitely looks and behaves more like an animal than a hobbit. So could it be that the ring changed his body's abilities to that of an animal of the dark, and that's why Gollum can see this well? I mean, it would make sense, right? He can see the shapes moving in the shadows, helping him hide away with his precious ring before danger comes close. By using the ring, he was also able to sustain himself for as long as he did. As the ring and its effects took a toll on his body and mental state, it also gave him these abilities that would serve him and the ring in a way. This is what I feel about Gollum's eyesight. What are your thoughts? Let us know down below.
Golden chips with a nice piece of fried fish.
Why does he have to spit every time? When Tolkien first published The Hobbit in 1937, he definitely did not anticipate the popularity Gollum would garner amongst the fans. That's why later, when he published The Lord of the Rings, he redesigned this character, making him a better suited part of this trilogy. Despite his intentions, or lack thereof, Gollum is one of the most recognizable characters in pop culture history. He is a villain, but not completely evil. From the way he speaks to the way he carries himself, all of them are extremely memorable and a crucial part of his character. His constant spitting and sputtering of his name in a wet cough is one such part. One fan theory suggests that perhaps the reason every time Gollum says his own nickname, he ends up coughing because of what happened at the Gladden Fields. Perhaps when Smeagol wrapped his fingers around Deagle's throat to get the One Ring, Deagle probably tried to call out to his cousin. Perhaps he tried to say Smeagol, hoping it would snap his cousin out of this murderous trance, but the hands on his neck prevented that. So all Deagle could manage was saying Gull while coughing. After being banished to the Misty Mountains, maybe Smeagol's subconscious replayed this incident several times throughout the centuries, and that is what created the evil, treacherous, and selfish Gollum persona. While this is a fan theory that you may or may not accept, let me tell you about Andy Serkis, the actor behind Gollum's iconic voice. Serkis knew about Gollum's character, and he wanted to give this character a voice that would fit him the best. He saw his cat hack up a hairball, and the sounds of his cat are what served as an inspiration for Gollum's rattly, raspy, throaty voice. But, as you can imagine, creating this voice for line after line took a toll on Andy Serkis. His entire body, as well as his throat, was affected by this voice. That is why, to counteract it, Andy Serkis had to sip on a special drink with lemon, honey, and other ingredients to keep his throat from getting too dry. However, as the honey and lemon soothed his vocal cords and throat, it also caused Andy Serkis to spit a lot. So it could very well be that all these incidents came together on screen to give us an extremely believable character and performance from Serkis as Gollum. How are Gollum and Shelob connected? Evil or not, Gollum was supposed to guide Sam and Frodo into Mordor. Throughout the journey portrayed in The Lord of the Rings, Gollum swayed between genuinely wanting to help them and wanting to betray them for the ring. As they were reaching the end of their journey, the urge to betray them and get the ring for himself grew within the heart of Gollum. That is why he ominously says that murdering both of the hobbits would be too risky, and he could let her do it. This her that he refers to in this scene is none other than Shelob, the spider-like monster who lives in Tort Ungol, near the border of Mordor. Usually, when Shelob devoured her victims, she would leave behind their clothes and bones. That's why Gollum thought of letting her do the deed so that he could salvage the ring from Frodo's discarded remains. As we know, Gollum actually did not succeed in his plan, for Sam managed to defeat Shelob after she had captured and paralyzed Frodo. Gollum assumed Frodo was dead, took the One Ring from him, and went on with his mission. The movies didn't do much of a good job explaining Gollum and Shelob's relationship, but any fan of the books knows that J.R.R. Tolkien did actually give us quite a good look at the unusual dynamic between these two monsters. Gollum and Shelob met in the 2980s at the Third Age. He was in Mordor because Sauron had imprisoned him. Eventually, when Sauron lets him go, Gollum decides to travel through Torch Ungol to go back to his mountains, leaving Mordor behind. Out of habit, Gollum was prying into all the dark holes that fell in his path, and that's when he came across Shelob's lair. Surprisingly, despite this rather rude intrusion, Shelob did not murder Gollum. The fact that Shelob let go of Gollum is something of interest. As you know, Shelob is the descendant of Ungoliant, the giant spider-like monster who helped Melkor in destroying the two Trees of Light in Valinor. Ungoliant had an insatiable hunger, and no matter how much she ate, she was never full, for she would keep on growing. She almost tried to eat the Silmarils, but when Melkor refused, she was willing to kill him for the gems. Eventually, Ungoliant ate herself to satiate her hunger, and that's how she died. With that type of lineage, it's not odd that Shelob let go of a victim who willfully walked into her lair. Is it not odd that Shelob let go of a victim who willfully walked into her lair? Well, we can actually give two reasons to explain away Shelob's unfounded kindness. The more obvious reason is that Gollum would have made a very poor meal. He is literally skin and bones. The other reason, which may not be more obvious but definitely a smarter one, is that Gollum struck a deal with her. He worshipped her and promised to bring her food. Gollum used to live near the Goblin Town, and whenever he found stray orcs, they would end up becoming his meal. Using his abilities to stalk and kill, Gollum would lure prey to Shelob, saving her the trouble of hunting. Because of this relationship that they already had, Gollum considered luring the hobbits to Shelob and having her do the murdering so that he could get his hands on the One Ring. This way, Gollum would also be able to explain away the lack of his guilt because he's technically not the one murdering them. It is Shelob, so he is technically a good guy. A crucial thing that we can note from this relationship between the two monsters is that, as Tolkien explained, if it was not for Shelob, maybe Gollum could have been able to redeem himself. The darkness of Shelob's evil trickled its way into Gollum's mind and wiped away the remorse or the morality that he still had. After all, Shelob and her mother were the beings with arguably the most evil intent all across Middle-earth. Because of their relationship and bargain, Shelob pushed Gollum more and more into depravity, which in turn increased his temptation for the One Ring. This eventually led to the destruction of the One Ring and Gollum's death, as we will see later. He can climb up mountains at an incredible speed. Climbing is no easy feat, especially when you're climbing in dark terrains with rocks jutting out everywhere, and you have no idea which one could give out when. However, if you can look beyond the physical discomfort and the injuries caused by the climb, you will soon find yourself being more inclined to climb based on your gut feeling. The more attuned you are, the less you care, the better climber you become. Or at least, that's what we see in the case of Gollum. He has no care for his body, for all he cares about is the ring. His long fingers, elongated arms, and surprisingly gaunt physique help him move at an incredible speed on seemingly impossible surfaces with ease. Sam and Frodo had a head start after their encounter with Shelob at her lair. Frodo and Gollum had an altercation, and then they went up ahead while Gollum was left behind. However, despite the head start, Frodo and Sam were soon found by Gollum, who scaled up Mount Doom in seemingly no time, preventing the hobbits from disposing of the ring. We could say that this ability of his was developed because of how the One Ring made him more and more animalistic, or it could be because of him adapting to the treacherous terrain of the Misty Mountains. Either way, I think all rock climbers should look up to Gollum, simply for his talent.
The sound of trees.
Why Gollum hates light. Given that Gollum had to adjust to the bare minimum light in the Misty Mountains, it comes as no surprise to anyone that when he left the mountains to go after Bilbo, he found out that his eyes could not tolerate the sunlight. Even in The Lord of the Rings, it was very clear that Gollum was uncomfortable with sunlight, despite being out in it for a while. Perhaps the animalistic changes that the One Ring brought within him were more aligned to the creatures of dark forces than we thought. I mean, the Nazguls also have a hard time seeing in sunlight. They can only make out shadowy outlines. So maybe, given that Gollum is so entangled with the dark forces, his body too went through these types of changes, and now he cannot simply adapt his vision to light like the rest of us. The Fate of Gollum. After the encounter at Shelob's lair, Frodo and Samwise climbed up Mount Doom with only one goal: destroying the One Ring. Frodo reached the edge of the cracks of Doom, and he was about to throw the ring, destroying it, when he realized that he could not. Instead, he claimed the ring for himself and put it on. Right then, Gollum attacked Sam with a rock and knocked him out. Frodo, since he was wearing the ring, turned himself invisible to evade Gollum. But Gollum is good at stalking. He quickly tracked Frodo's footsteps and managed to get on top of his shoulders. Frodo tried to get Gollum off of him, while Gollum was more focused on getting his precious back. Eventually, Gollum bit off Frodo's ring finger and took the ring for himself. But this joy of victory did not last long, as Gollum teetered on the edge of this great pit in his joy and eventually fell to his death with his precious. However, this death is actually very poignant. When Bilbo first met Gollum, instead of killing him on sight, Bilbo let him go. This allowed Gollum and Frodo to meet down the line, which eventually helped the whole world in a way. Gollum's obsession with the ring, his depravity, and cruelty for the ring was a necessary evil. Had he been killed long ago by Bilbo, the quest of the Fellowship would have been ruined, as there would have been no one to guide Frodo into the cracks of doom. Since Gollum was there and he was simply that obsessed with the One Ring, he attacked Frodo, snapped him out of the soul-crushing evil of the ring, and fell into the lava pit with it, destroying the one thing that would have tipped the balance between good and evil forever. Years after Gollum's death, Frodo actually forgave him. Gandalf pointed out that Gollum was not actually an evil being who deserved death. He was simply an unlucky entity who ended up bound, trapped, and irreversibly entwined with the ring. Gollum serves as a reminder of the future Frodo himself would have had if he had kept the ring for himself. Marvelous verdict. With all of this being said, Gollum is simply an unlucky man who ends up falling for the lust that the ring tempted him with. This greed, lust, and obsession for power is what ended up being his downfall. But even in his last moments, he did something good, albeit unknowingly. So, like Zangief said in Wreck-It Ralph, you are a bad guy, but that does not mean you are a bad guy. Let us know what you guys think about Gollum and who you want us to cover next. Until next time, take care. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.